The wind howled through the dusty streets of Dust Creek, Arizona territory, carrying with it the acrid smell of gunpowder and desperation. It was the summer of 1874, and the sun hung mercilessly in the sky, turning the earth into a cracked canvas of brown and ochre. Along the main thoroughfare, tumbleweeds danced between the weathered buildings like ghosts of better times that never were. Ethan McGraw stood on the porch of the Silver Dollar Saloon, his weathered hat casting a shadow over steel-gray eyes that had seen too much. At 35, he cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made lesser men step aside. His spurs clinked softly as he shifted his weight, watching the street with the casual alertness of a man who'd survived by never letting his guard down. He owned the Triple M Ranch, 15,000 acres of prime grazing land that made him one of the wealthiest men in the territory. But wealth in Dust Creek was relative. It meant you could afford bullets for your Colt .45 and feed for your horses when the drought hit hard. It meant you could sleep with one eye open instead of two. The saloon doors swung open behind him, releasing a wave of piano music and raucous laughter. Jake Morrison, his foreman, stumbled out, wiping whiskey from his grizzled beard. "Boss, you planning on standing out here all day like a statue?" Jake squinted against the harsh sunlight. "That poker game inside's getting mighty interesting." Ethan's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "Interesting how?" "Silas Kearney just rolled into town with his boys. He's holding court at the big table, throwing money around like he owns the place." The name made Ethan's jaw tighten. Silas Kearney Loan Shark, cattle rustler, and the closest thing Dust Creek had to a crime boss. The man had his fingers in every dirty deal from here to Tucson, and the law seemed content to look the other way as long as the bribes kept coming. "How many men with him?" Ethan asked, his hand unconsciously checking the position of his revolver. "4. That mean-eyed gunslinger Bart Hutchins, and 3 others I don't recognize. New blood, probably." Ethan nodded slowly. In his younger days, he might have walked away from trouble, but the war had changed him, hardened him in ways that went deeper than the scars on his back from Confederate grape shot. He'd come west to escape the ghosts of Gettysburg and Antietam, only to find that some ghosts followed you no matter how far you ran. "I reckon I'll see what Mr. Kearney's celebrating," he said, adjusting his gun belt. Inside the Silver Dollar, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of spilled beer. Miners, cowboys, and drifters crowded around tables, their voices creating a constant din. At the bar, painted ladies in faded finery plied their trade with practiced smiles and hollow eyes. But it was the scene at the back table that drew Ethan's attention. Silas Kearney sat like a king holding court, his black suit immaculate despite the dust that coated everything in Dust Creek. He was a handsome devil, Ethan had to admit, smooth-featured, with slicked-back hair and the kind of smile that promised everything and delivered nothing but pain. And there, standing beside the table with a tray of drinks, was a young woman Ethan had never seen before. She couldn't have been more than 24, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple bun that did nothing to diminish its lustrous shine. Her dress was plain brown calico, mended in places but clean, and she held herself with a dignity that seemed out of place in the raucous saloon. But it was her eyes that caught him, green as spring grass, blazing with a mixture of pride and barely contained fury. "Come now, Miss Rosewood," Silas was saying, his voice carrying over the noise. "Surely a beauty like you can spare a smile for your future husband." The woman's knuckles went white around the tray. "Mr. Kearney, I've told you before, I'm not interested in your proposal." "Proposal?" Silas laughed, and his men joined in. "Who said anything about proposing your daddy owed me $800 when he died? That debt passes to you, and I'm offering you a way to pay it off. You should be grateful." "My father's debts died with him," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Not according to the papers I have." Silas produced a document from his coat, waving it like a flag. "Signed and witnessed, You can marry me and have the debt forgiven, or I can take your mama's boarding house and toss you all into the street. Your choice, Clara." Clara. The name suited her, Ethan thought, clear and strong, like her spirit. "That's a forgery and you know it," Clara said, setting the tray down with more force than necessary. "My father could barely write his own name, let alone sign a contract like that." Silas's smile turned predatory. "Are you calling me a liar, Miss Rosewood? That's a dangerous accusation to make." The saloon had grown quieter, patrons sensing the tension like animals before a storm. Ethan found himself moving closer, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. "I'm calling you exactly what you are," Clara said, lifting her chin. "A cheat and a bully who preys on those who can't fight back." The slap came fast, Silas's hand cracking across her cheek with enough force to send her stumbling. The saloon went dead silent. Clara touched her reddening cheek, and for a moment, Ethan saw something flicker in her eyes. Not fear, but a rage so pure it could have melted iron. She straightened slowly, and when she spoke, her voice was low and dangerous. "You'll regret that." Silas stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Will I now? And who's going to make me you?" He grabbed her arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Listen good, girl. You belong to me. Whether you accept it or not, the sooner you understand that, the easier—" The lady said she wasn't interested. Ethan's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He stood a few feet away, thumbs hooked in his gun belt, the picture of casual readiness. Silas turned, his grip on Clara's arm tightening. "McGraw, this doesn't concern you." "Man puts his hands on a woman in my presence. It concerns me plenty." Ethan's gray eyes were cold as winter steel. "Let her go." Or what? Bart Hutchins had materialized beside his boss, hand hovering over his pistol. "You planning to take on all 5 of us, Cowboy?" Ethan smiled. And it wasn't a pleasant thing. "If need be, though I reckon at least 2 of you boys won't live long enough to clear leather. Question is, which 2? The saloon held its breath. Clara looked between the men, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. The smart thing would be to slip away while they were distracted, but something kept her rooted in place. "This woman owes me a debt," Silas said, his cultured voice taking on an edge. "It's a legal matter." "Then handle it legal-like," Ethan replied. "Not by manhandling ladies in saloons." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Silas released Clara's arm with a shove that sent her against the bar. "This isn't over," he said, straightening his coat. "Not by a long shot." He gestured to his men, and they filed out, Bart throwing one last venomous look over his shoulder. The saloon slowly came back to life, conversations resuming in hushed tones. Clara rubbed her arm, watching Ethan with those remarkable green eyes. "I didn't need your help." "Never said you did." Ethan touched the brim of his hat. "But sometimes it's nice to have it anyway." She studied him for a moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You're Ethan McGraw, the rancher. Guilty as charged." "People say you used to be a gunfighter, that you killed 20 men in the war." Ethan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "People say a lot of things. Don't make them true." "But some of it is." It wasn't a question. "Some," he admitted. "Does that frighten you?" Clara surprised him by almost smiling. "Mr. McGraw, I serve drinks to minors, cowboys, and outlaws 6 days a week. I've been proposed to by drunks, threatened by gamblers, and now apparently sold to pay a debt that doesn't exist. Very little frightens me anymore." "Silas Kearney should." The almost smile faded. "I know what he is, but I won't run, and I won't give in. This is my home. My mother is sick. My young brother needs schooling. I can't just leave." Ethan studied her, recognizing the steel beneath the soft exterior. He'd known soldiers with less backbone than this saloon girl. How old's your brother? 12. Tommy's a good boy. Smart, too. He could be something if... She trailed off, then shook her head. I'm sorry. You don't need to hear my troubles. Maybe I do. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. Look, Miss Rosewood. Clara, Silas Kearney doesn't make idle threats. He'll be back, and next time he might not care who's watching. Then I'll deal with it when he does. She picked up her tray, back straight. Thank you for your intervention, Mr. McGraw, but I can take care of myself. She moved away before he could respond, weaving through the tables with practiced ease. Ethan watched her go, something stirring in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Not since before the war, before the killing, before he'd built walls around himself higher than any ranch fence. Jake appeared at his elbow, having watched the whole thing from the bar. That was a fool thing to do. Boss, Kearney's got a long memory and a short temper. Let him remember, Ethan said, still watching Clara as she served drinks to a table of minors. Man like that needs to be reminded he doesn't own everything he sees. Maybe not, Jake agreed, following his gaze. But he's got the men and the guns to take what he wants. And that girl, she's got pride, but pride don't stop bullets. Ethan knew Jake was right. In Dust Creek, power came from the barrel of a gun and the weight of your gold. Justice was whatever the strongest man said it was. But looking at Clara Rosewood, seeing the defiance in her stance and the courage in those green eyes, he felt something shift inside him. He'd come west to escape his past, to build something clean and new under the vast Arizona sky. The Triple M Ranch was his monument to forgetting. 15,000 acres where he could pretend the screams of dying men didn't echo in his dreams. But maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than running from ghosts. Jake, he said quietly, find out what you can about this debt Kearney claims. Check the county records. Talk to people who knew Clara's father. Quiet-like. Jake raised an eyebrow. Are you getting involved in this? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, watching as Clara laughed at something one of the miners said, the sound like water in the desert. Maybe it's time I stopped just watching life happen from the sidelines. As if sensing his gaze, Clara looked up, their eyes meeting across the smoky room. For a heartbeat, something passed between them, not attraction exactly, but recognition. Two souls who'd learned to stand alone, suddenly wondering what it might be like to stand together. Then the moment broke. Clara turned away, and Ethan headed for the door, his spurs ringing on the wooden floor. Outside, Dust Creek baked under the merciless sun, but for the first time in years, Ethan McGraw didn't feel quite so cold inside. The wind picked up, sending dust devils spinning down the street, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Change was coming to Dust Creek, whether its inhabitants were ready or not, and at the center of it all, a cowboy with too many ghosts and a woman with too much pride were about to discover that sometimes the greatest risk of all was letting someone else in. The Silver Dollar Saloon was packed to the rafters 3 nights later, thick with smoke and the sharp tang of whiskey. Word had spread about the big poker game. Silas Kearney had put up $1,000 and challenged any man brave enough to match it. It was more money than most folks in Dust Creek would see in 5 years of honest work. Ethan McGraw pushed through the swinging doors, his eyes immediately scanning the room. He'd spent the last few days having Jake dig into Kearney's claim on the Rosewood debt, and what they'd found stank worse than a week-old carcass in the desert sun. Forged signatures, false witnesses, and a paper trail that led right back to Judge Harlan Morse, Kearney's bought-and-paid-for law dog. The crowd parted as Ethan made his way to the back, where Kearney held court at the green felt table. The man looked up with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Well, the cattle baron graces us with his presence. Kearney gestured to an empty chair. Care to try your luck, McGraw, or are you only brave when it comes to interfering in other men's business? Ethan pulled out the chair and sat down, reaching into his coat to produce a leather pouch heavy with gold coins. "Deal me in." A murmur ran through the crowd. Men pressed closer, eager to witness what promised to be more than just a card game. At the bar, Ethan caught a glimpse of auburn hair. The Rosewood girl was working again, her face carefully neutral as she served drinks. "Stakes are 1,000 to start," Kearney said, shuffling the cards with practiced ease. "Unless that's too rich for your blood." Ethan counted out the coins, the clink of gold on wood audible even over the saloon's noise. "I reckon I can manage." 2 other men were at the table, Carl Braxton, who owned the general store, and a traveling gambler in a brocade vest who went by the name Memphis Jim. Both looked nervous, caught between 2 forces of nature. "Ooh, 5-card stud," Kearney announced. "Nothing wild." He dealt with smooth efficiency, cards sliding across the felt like promises. Ethan picked up his hand, face impassive. 2 queens looked back at him. Not bad to start. He threw in his ante and waited. The first few hands were careful, everyone feeling out the competition. Memphis Jim folded early and often, clearly just happy to be at the big table. Braxton played conservative, protecting his stake. But between Ethan and Kearney, something else was happening, a duel with cards instead of bullets. "Heard you've been asking questions around town," Kearney said casually, raising the bet by 50. "About matters that don't concern you." "Lots of things concern me," Ethan replied, matching the raise. "The drought, cattle prices, whether the railroad's coming through." He paused. "The welfare of honest folks being squeezed by crooked dealings." Kearney's smile tightened. "Careful. McGraw. Slander's a serious charge in these parts. So's forgery." The word dropped like a stone in still water. Braxton suddenly found somewhere else to look, while Memphis Jim developed an intense interest in his whiskey glass. "I call," Kearney said, his voice dangerously quiet. Ethan laid down his queens. Kearney showed 2 jacks and raked in the pot, but his eyes never left Ethan's face. "You're playing a dangerous game." "Thought we were playing poker." The crowd laughed nervously, but the tension ratcheted up another notch. Rosewood. Ethan still had trouble thinking of her as anything but the Rosewood girl moved between the tables, and he noticed how she avoided coming near theirs. Smart woman. The next hour saw fortunes shift back and forth. Memphis Jim busted out, leaving with elaborate thanks for the experience. Braxton hung on grimly, sweating through his shirt. But the real battle was between the 2 men who'd barely looked at their cards, playing each other more than the game. Then came the hand that changed everything. Kearney dealt, and Ethan found himself looking at 3 kings. He kept his breathing steady, his hands still, in poker, like in gunfighting. The man who showed his intentions first usually lost. "100 to start," Kearney said, tossing in chips. "Raise you 200, Ethan replied. Braxton folded immediately. Kearney studied Ethan for a long moment, then smiled. "Let's make this interesting. 500. "You're light," Ethan observed. "That's more than you have on the table." "Then I'll add collateral." Kearney produced a familiar document. "The Rosewood debt, $800 value, to cover my bet and then some." The saloon went quiet. All eyes turned to the bar, where the girl had gone very still, a glass frozen halfway to a customer's waiting hand. "That paper's not worth the ink it's written with," Ethan said flatly. "Judge Morse says different, but if you're so sure—" Kearney leaned back, supremely confident. "Put up the money and find out, unless you're all talk McGraw." Ethan felt the weight of the room's attention. This was about more than cards now. It was about power, about who ruled in Dust Creek. He could fold, walk away, keep his money and his ranch safe. It was the smart play. Instead, he reached into his coat and produced another pouch. 800 to call, and raise you another 5. Gasps echoed through the saloon. That was serious money, enough to buy a small ranch or outfit a mining operation. Kearney's confident smile faltered for just a second. That's $1,300, Braxton breathed. Good Lord. Kearney's jaw worked. He didn't have that kind of cash on hand, and everyone knew it. I'll put up my interest in the Lazy J Ranch, worth twice that. Paper deed, Ethan asked. Kearney nodded curtly, producing the document from his coat. Everything important in Dust Creek was done on paper. It was the only law that mattered out here. Call, Ethan said simply. The crowd pressed closer. Someone had stopped the piano player, and the only sound was harsh breathing and the creak of floorboards. Even the working girls had stopped their circulation, drawn to the spectacle. Kearney laid down his hand with a flourish. Full house, aces over eights. A collective intake of breath. It was a monster hand, the kind that came along once in 100 deals. Kearney started to reach for the pot, already savoring his victory. Not so fast, Ethan said quietly. He laid down his cards one by one. King, 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 the fourth king, and for good measure, a queen. 4 of a kind beats a full house, I believe. The silence was deafening. Kearney stared at the cards as if they might change if he looked hard enough. His face went from red to white to a dangerous purple. You cheated, he snarled. Ethan's hand dropped to his gun. Care to repeat that? Nobody's that lucky. Nobody. You dealt the cards. Ethan reminded him. You saying you don't trust your own dealing? It was a trap, and everyone knew it. If Kearney admitted to cheating, he'd be run out of town. If he didn't, he'd have to accept the loss. The man's hands clenched and unclenched on the table. Mr. Kearney. The voice was clear and unexpected. Rosewood had approached the table, her chin high despite the danger. You lost. Accept it like a gentleman. Kearney turned on her like a snake. You're part of this, batting your eyes at him, getting him to... The crash of Kearney's chair hitting the floor cut him off. He'd stood so fast his hip caught the table, sending chips and cards flying. His hand went for his gun, and time seemed to slow. Ethan was already moving, his coat clearing leather with the liquid speed that had kept him alive through a dozen gunfights. But before either man could fire, a spray of whiskey caught Kearney full in the face. The girl stood there with an empty bottle, eyes blazing. That's for slapping me, you pig. Kearney sputtered, temporarily blinded. His men started forward, but stopped as they found themselves looking down the barrel of Ethan's .45. I'd think real careful about your next move. Boys, Ethan said conversationally, your boss lost fair and square. The debts are paid, including the one he holds on Miss Rosewood here. Unless you want to dispute it with Lead, I suggest you help Mr. Kearney find his way out. Bart Hutchins looked ready to try it anyway, but Kearney, wiping whiskey from his eyes, raised a hand. This isn't over. McGraw, not by a long shot. And you girl, his voice dropped to a venomous whisper. You'll pay for this. Both of you will. He stormed out, his men trailing behind. The saloon erupted in excited chatter, everyone talking at once about what they'd witnessed. Money changed hands as bets were settled. Most folks had wagered on Kearney. Ethan holstered his gun and began gathering his winnings. The rosewood debt paper he folded carefully and stood up. The girl was standing there, looking shell-shocked. Why? She asked simply. He handed her the paper. Because it was the right thing to do. She took it with trembling fingers, staring at it as if it might vanish. This means we're free. The boarding house, everything. It means Kearney has no legal claim on you or yours. Ethan corrected. But don't mistake that for safety. He's not the forgiving type. Neither am I, she said, and there was steel in her voice. Mr. McGraw. Ethan. Ethan. She said it carefully, like she was tasting the name. I don't know how to thank you. No thanks needed. Just be careful. Kearney won't let this stand. She nodded, clutching the paper to her chest. My mother, she'll want to thank you properly. Would you come to dinner tomorrow? It's not much, but I'd be honored, he said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. For the first time since he'd seen her, she truly smiled. It transformed her face, making her look younger and somehow more beautiful. 6 o'clock. The boarding house is... I know where it is. He'd made it his business to know. I'll be there. She turned to go, then looked back. That was some poker playing. Sometimes you get lucky. And sometimes, she said, her smile turning impish, you get the cards you need right when you need them most. She disappeared into the crowd before he could ask what she meant by that. Jake appeared at his elbow, looking worried. Boss, you just made a powerful enemy. Already had plenty of those, Ethan replied, pocketing his winnings. One more won't hurt. This is different. Kearney owns half the territory's debts. He's got judges, sheriffs, even some rangers in his pocket. He could make life real difficult for the Triple M. Ethan looked toward where the girl had vanished into the crowd. Some things are worth the difficulty, Jake. His foreman shook his head. Never thought I'd see the day Ethan McGraw went soft over a woman. Who says I'm going soft? But even as he said it, Ethan knew something had changed. The careful walls he'd built around himself had cracked just a little, letting in a sliver of light he'd forgotten existed. Outside, Dust Creek slumbered under a canopy of stars. Somewhere in the darkness, Silas Kearney was nursing his wounds and planning revenge. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But tonight, Ethan McGraw had won more than a poker game. He'd remembered what it felt like to fight for something beyond his own survival. And for a man who'd spent years running from his past, it felt dangerously like coming home. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Triple M ranch as Ethan McGraw stood on his porch, watching the horizon. 3 days had passed since the poker game, and an uneasy quiet had settled over Dust Creek. It was the kind of quiet that came before a storm, and Ethan had lived through enough storms to recognize the signs. Boss Jake rode up hard, dust billowing around his horse. We got trouble. Found 3 head of cattle shot dead by the eastern waterhole. Branded cattle, left to rot in the sun. Ethan's jaw tightened. Killing branded cattle was a declaration of war in ranch country. Kearney's work. Who else? And that ain't the worst of it. The waterhole's been fouled, dead animals thrown in. It'll take weeks to clean out. The drought had been bad enough without someone poisoning water sources. Ethan buckled on his gun belt, mind racing. The Triple M had other water, but losing the eastern hole meant moving the herds, stretching his men thin. Double the night watches, he ordered, and send word to the other ranchers. If Kearney's starting something, they need to know. He'd known retaliation would come, but he'd expected a direct attack, not this cowardly assault on his livelihood. Then again, Kearney had always preferred to break men slowly, piece by piece. That evening, Ethan rode into town for the promised dinner at the Rosewood boarding house. The streets were quieter than usual, folks hurrying about their business with wary glances. News of the poisoned waterhole had spread, and everyone knew what it meant. The boarding house sat on the respectable end of town, a 2-story clapboard building that had seen better days. Paint peeled from the walls, and the porch sagged slightly, but the windows were clean and curtains hung straight. Pride in poverty. Ethan recognized it well. Margaret Rosewood answered his knock, and Ethan saw where her daughter got her strength. Despite obvious illness that had thinned her frame and put shadows under her eyes, she held herself with dignity. Mr. McGraw, we're so grateful you could come. Her voice was cultured, suggesting education and better times. Please, come in. The parlor was sparse but spotless. Worn furniture had been carefully arranged to hide the worst of the damage, and fresh wildflowers in a cracked vase added a touch of color. A boy sat at a table near the window, books spread before him. "Tommy, come meet Mr. McGraw," Margaret called. The boy looked up, and Ethan was struck by the intelligence in those young eyes. Same green as his sister's, but where hers held defiance, his held curiosity. "Pleased to meet you, sir," Tommy said, offering his hand with grave formality. "Sarah says you won our house back from Mr. Kearney." Sarah, so that was her given name. It suited her better than Clara. Ethan thought, biblical, strong, enduring. "Your sister exaggerates," Ethan replied, shaking the boy's hand. "I just played some cards." "Must have been some game," Tommy said with a grin that made him look his age. Sarah threw a whole bottle of whiskey at him. Sarah appeared in the doorway, cheeks flushed from the kitchen heat. She'd traded her saloon dress for a simple blue calico that somehow made her look even prettier. "What did I tell you about telling tales?" "It's not a tale if it's true," Tommy protested. "Go wash up for supper," she said, ruffling his hair affectionately. "And use soap this time." The boy groaned but complied, leaving the adults alone. An awkward silence fell. "I'm sorry about the waterhole," Sarah said quietly. "It's my fault. If I hadn't—" "Stop right there," Ethan interrupted. "Kearney's choices are his own. This was coming regardless. But the drought. Can your ranch survive?" "We'll manage. The Triple M has weathered worse than Silas Kearney." Margaret coughed delicately into a handkerchief, and Ethan noticed the spots of red she tried to hide. Consumption, most likely. No wonder Sarah was desperate to keep the boarding house medical care cost money they didn't have. "Shall we eat?" Margaret suggested, gesturing toward the dining room. "It's nothing fancy. I'm afraid—" The meal was simple beans, cornbread, and preserved vegetables, but well prepared and served with touching formality. Tommy peppered Ethan with questions about ranching, horses, and whether he'd really been in the war. "Were you a general?" the boy asked eagerly. "No, just a sergeant. Nothing special." "Sarah says you saved her from Mr. Kearney. That sounds pretty special to me." "Tommy, eat your beans," Sarah said, but she was smiling. As the meal progressed, Ethan found himself relaxing in ways he hadn't in years. The simple domesticity, the easy conversation, Tommy's enthusiasm, it all reminded him of things he'd thought lost forever, things he'd told himself he didn't need or want. "Mr. McGraw," Margaret said as Sarah cleared the plates. "I want to thank you properly for what you did. That debt— my late husband never would have signed such a thing. He was many things, but not a fool." "I know," Ethan said simply. "Jake found the real documents at the land office. Your husband died free and clear. Kearney was counting on you not having the resources to prove it." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Then you knew it was fraudulent when you played for it." "I suspected. Kearney's not as clever as he thinks. But you risked $1,300 on a suspicion." Ethan glanced toward the kitchen where Sarah was working. Seemed worth the risk. Margaret followed his gaze and smiled knowingly. "Yes, I suppose it did." After dinner, Tommy showed Ethan his books, precious things in a frontier town. The boy was studying everything from arithmetic to history, clearly hungry for knowledge. "Sarah teaches me," he said proudly. "She's smart, smarter than the schoolmaster when we had one." "Town doesn't have a school?" Ethan asked. "Not since Mr. Paulson left last year. Kearney raised his rent until he couldn't afford to stay." Tommy's face darkened. "Sarah says we shouldn't speak ill of folks, but I don't like Mr. Kearney much." "That's probably wise," Ethan said carefully. "But don't let him or anyone else stop you from learning. Education's important out here. Might be the most important thing." Later, as Margaret dozed in her chair and Tommy returned to his studies, Sarah walked Ethan to the porch. The evening was cooler, a blessed relief from the day's heat. "You're good with him," she said. "Tommy doesn't usually take to strangers." He's a good kid. Smart, too. Reminds me of... Ethan caught himself. Of my younger brother, Benjamin. He was about Tommy's age when the war started. The use of past tense hung between them. Sarah touched his arm gently. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago, but the wound still ached, like all the others he carried. Typhoid took him while I was away fighting, 13 years old, and I wasn't there. You couldn't have known. Maybe. Doesn't change the outcome. He looked out at the darkening street. That's why I came west. Too many ghosts back home. And yet here you are, making new connections. Her hand was still on his arm, warm through his shirt. That takes courage. Or foolishness. Sometimes they're the same thing. She withdrew her hand, wrapping her shawl tighter. Ethan, I need to ask, why are you really doing this, the poker game? Dinner. Spending time with Tommy. What do you want? It was a fair question, and one he'd been asking himself. I honestly don't know. For 5 years. All I've wanted was to build my ranch and be left alone. Then I saw you stand up to Kearney in that saloon, and something shifted. I'm not looking for a protector, she said firmly. Or a husband, despite what this town thinks a woman needs. I can take care of my family. I know you can. That's part of what I admire. He turned to face her. But this isn't about what you need. Sarah, maybe it's about what I need. Maybe I'm tired of being alone with my ghosts. She studied his face in the dim light. You're not what I expected. Ethan McGraw, people say you're dangerous, cold, but there's kindness in you. Buried deep, maybe, but there. Don't mistake a few good deeds for character. I've done things. He shook his head. There's blood on my hands that won't wash clean. We've all done things we're not proud of to survive. That's life out here. She met his eyes steadily. The question is what we do tomorrow, not what we did yesterday. A rider galloped past, breaking the moment. Ethan recognized one of his ranch hands and tensed. The man reined up hard. Boss, thank God I found you. We got problems. Kearney's men hit the north pasture, scattered the herd, set fire to the line shack. Bill's hurt bad, took a bullet in the shoulder. Ethan's face hardened into the mask Sarah had glimpsed in the saloon. How many? 6, maybe 7. They wore masks, but we recognized Bart Hutchins's paint horse. Get back to the ranch. Tell Jake to gather the men. I'll be right behind you. The hand galloped off. Ethan turned to Sarah. The warmth of moments before replaced by cold purpose. This is what I am, he said quietly. What I'll always be, a man with enemies and blood on his hands. You sure you want that in your life? Instead of backing away, she stepped closer. I threw whiskey in Silas Kearney's face. I'm already in this fight. The question is whether we face it together or alone. He looked at her, really looked at her. Not the pretty saloon girl or the dutiful daughter, but the woman who'd stood up to the most dangerous man in the territory with nothing but courage and a whiskey bottle. Together, then, he said. But on one condition, you and your family come to the Triple M. It's not safe here anymore. I can't leave the boarding house. It's all we have. It won't do you much good if Kearney burns it down with you inside. This is temporary, just until things settle. She wanted to argue. He could see it in her eyes, but concern for her family won out. Let me talk to Mother. Talk fast. We leave within the hour. As he strode toward the livery stable to get his horse, Ethan's mind was already on tactics. Defense, the violence to come. But underneath, something else stirred. For the first time in years, he had something to fight for beyond his own survival. Kearney had made a mistake. He'd given Ethan McGraw a reason to care again. And a man with something to protect was far more dangerous than one with nothing to lose. The Triple M ranch sprawled under a harvest moon, its buildings casting long shadows across the dusty ground. 2 weeks had passed since the Rosewood family took refuge there, and an uneasy routine had settled in. By day, Sarah helped Cookie in the kitchen and tended to her mother. By night, she found herself on the porch, trading carefully guarded words with Ethan McGraw. Tonight was different. The air crackled with tension as riders returned from patrol, their faces grim. Another waterhole poisoned, more cattle missing. Kearney was bleeding the ranch slowly, and everyone knew it. "You can't keep playing defense," Sarah said, watching Ethan clean his rifle with mechanical precision. "He'll wear you down until there's nothing left." "What would you have me do, ride into town and call him out?" Ethan's voice held an edge of frustration. "That's what he wants. The moment I become the aggressor, he can cry self-defense and have the law on his side." "Since when has Kearney cared about the law?" "Since he bought it." Ethan set the rifle aside, running a hand through his hair. "Every move has to be careful, calculated. One mistake and you lose everything." "I know." Sarah moved closer, her presence a warmth in the cool night air. "But maybe that's the problem. You're so focused on not losing, you've forgotten how to fight to win." He looked at her sharply. Easy words from someone who's never had to... Never had to what? Her temper flared, green eyes blazing. "Never had to fight, never had to protect what's mine. I've been fighting my whole life. Ethan McGraw. Fighting poverty. Fighting men who think they own me. Fighting to keep my family together. Don't you dare tell me I don't understand." The words hung between them like a challenge. Then, surprising them both, Ethan laughed, a short, rueful sound. "You're right. I apologize." "I don't want apologies. I want..." she faltered, unsure how to finish. "What do you want, Sarah?" The question was loaded with more than its simple words. She studied his face in the moonlight, seeing the weariness there, the weight of responsibility and old pain. "I want you to stop treating me like glass that might break. I want you to trust me. I want..." She took a breath. "I want to know why you look at me the way you do when you think I'm not watching." Ethan went very still. "Sarah." "No. We've danced around this for 2 weeks. Your men are whispering. My mother keeps giving me knowing looks, and Tommy asks daily when you're going to marry me. So let's have it out. What are we doing here?" "You know what we're doing. Keeping you safe until..." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from him. "Every night we talk. Every morning you find excuses to be where I am. You taught Tommy to rope cattle yesterday. You sit with my mother while she sleeps. That's not just protection. Ethan, that's me being a fool," he said harshly, standing abruptly. "You're 24 years old, Sarah. You have your whole life ahead of you. You don't need to tie yourself to a broken-down gunfighter with more enemies than friends." "Don't I get a say in what I need?" "Not in this. I won't." She slapped him, not hard, more surprise than force, her palm against his chest where his shirt opened at the collar. The sound seemed to echo in the night air. They stared at each other, both shocked by the action. Then, something shifted in Ethan's eyes, a wall crumbling that he'd held for too long. "Darlin," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous drawl she'd heard in the saloon. "That'll cost you." Before she could respond, he pulled her against him, one hand tangling in her hair, the other at her waist. For a moment they stood frozen, breathing hard, staring at each other like adversaries about to duel. "What's the price?" she whispered. "The truth," he said. "You want to know why I look at you fine? Because you make me remember things I'd buried. Hope, softness, the possibility of something beyond survival. You make me want things I've got no right to want." "Such as?" "A future, a family, someone to come home to who isn't paid to be there." His thumb traced her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. I want you, Sarah Rosewood, and it terrifies me more than any man with a gun ever has." She reached up, covering his hand with hers. "Why?" "Because I've lost everyone I've ever cared about. Parents to fever, brother to disease, friends to war, my soul to the killing that followed. I'm poison, Sarah. Everything I touch turns to ash. Then I'll risk burning. She pressed closer, feeling his heart race under her palm. I'm not some innocent girl, Ethan. I know what you are, what you've done, but I also know who you are. The man who risked everything for a stranger, who treats my brother like family, who holds my mother's hand when the pain gets bad. Sarah? I know you could have any woman in the territory, ranchers' daughters, wealthy widows. So why are you wasting time with a saloon girl who has nothing to offer but trouble? Because you're not just any woman. His voice was rough with emotion. You're the first person in 5 years who's looked at me and seen more than a killer or a meal ticket. You see, me. Then see me too, she challenged. Not the poor girl who needs rescuing. Not the pretty face in the saloon. Me, Sarah, who wants you despite your ghosts. Not in ignorance of them. He studied her face like a map to hidden treasure. You understand what you're asking Kearney's just the beginning. I've made enemies from here to Missouri. Some for pay, some for principle. Any one of them could show up tomorrow. Then we'll face them together. Your mother approves, rather enthusiastically, actually. Tommy already calls you Mr. Ethan and asks when you'll teach him to shoot. The ranch hands respect you and would follow you into hell itself. Jake's already running a betting pool on when you'll propose. Ethan blinked. He's what? Sarah smiled, the expression lighting up her whole face. Cookie has $5 on next month. I think you should know I have money on next week. So if you could accommodate. He laughed then, really laughed. The sound rusty from disuse, but genuine. Sarah Rosewood, you are without doubt the most infuriating, stubborn, magnificent woman I have ever met. Is that a yes? Instead of answering with words, he kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was 5 years of loneliness meeting 2 weeks of mounting tension, and it burned like wildfire. Sarah gave as good as she got, pouring all her own frustration and longing into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. That was unexpected, Sarah managed. You slapped me, Ethan pointed out, still holding her close. I warned you there'd be a price. Worth every penny. She traced the scar on his jaw, a souvenir from some long-ago fight. So what happens now? Now. He glanced toward the bunkhouse where lights were mysteriously appearing at windows. Now we apparently make Jake a richer man. She laughed, the sound bright in the darkness. I meant with us, you impossible man. I know what you meant. He sobered, catching her hand in his. Sarah, I can't promise you an easy life. Hell, I can't even promise you a long one. But whatever time we have, we'll make it count, she finished. Together. Together, he agreed, sealing it with another kiss. A wolf howled in the distance. And somewhere closer, an owl called. The night sounds of the desert continued around them, indifferent to human drama. But on the porch of the Triple M Ranch, 2 damaged souls had found something worth the risk of breaking again. We should go in, Sarah said eventually, before Tommy comes looking and gets an education. In a moment, Ethan held her close, unwilling to let go just yet. Let me remember this. The night Sarah Rosewood slapped some sense into me. Technically, I slapped your chest, not your head. Close enough. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Though, if we're being technical, you still owe me. For what? The slap was for one truth, but I told you several. She pulled back to look at him, eyebrow raised. Are you keeping score? Always. Habit from too many card games. And what would you claim as payment for these extra truths? He considered, then smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered features. Marry me. Sarah's breath caught. Ethan, not tonight, not even next week, though it would win you that bet. But soon, When this mess with Kearney is settled and we can do it proper, marry me, Sarah. Let me try to be the man you seem to think I am." "You already are that man," she said softly. "You just need to believe it." "Is that a yes? Ask me again when you're not keeping score," she teased, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Ask me when it's not about payment or debts or settling accounts. Ask me because you can't imagine any other answer." "Fair enough." He released her reluctantly. "But know this, I'm a patient man when the prize is worth it. And you, Sarah Rosewood, are worth everything." As they walked back into the house, hand in hand, neither saw the rider watching from the ridge. By dawn, Silas Kearney would know about the growing attachment between Ethan McGraw and the Rosewood girl, and he would know exactly how to use it against them. The acrid smell of smoke woke Ethan before the shouts did. He rolled from his bed, grabbing his gun belt and boots in one practiced motion. Through his window, orange flames danced against the night sky. The barn was ablaze. "Fire all hands to the barn." Jake's voice carried across the ranch as men stumbled from the bunkhouse, many still in their union suits. Ethan burst onto the porch to find chaos. Horses screamed in terror, cattle bellowed, and the crackling roar of flames filled the air. "The horses!" someone yelled. "They're still inside!" Ethan didn't hesitate. He plunged toward the inferno, only to be brought up short by gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness from multiple positions. The fire was a trap. "Take cover!" he roared, diving behind a water trough as bullets whined overhead. More gunfire erupted from the house. Sarah appeared at an upstairs window with his spare Winchester, laying down covering fire with surprising accuracy. The sight of her, nightgown billowing, hair wild, rifle steady, sent a jolt of fierce pride through him, even as fear clenched his gut. "EJ, get men on the west side. They're trying to flank us." The battle raged as the barn burned. Ethan counted muzzle flashes. 7, maybe 8 attackers. Kearney had come in force. Through the smoke and confusion, he heard Tommy's frightened voice calling for his sister. "Stay down! Tommy!" Sarah shouted back. "Stay with Mother!" A figure broke from cover, running toward the house with a torch. Ethan dropped him with 2 shots. But another took his place. They weren't just here to burn the barn. They wanted everything. "Boss, they're at the corral." Ethan turned to see masked riders cutting the fence, scattering the remuda. Months of work, thousands of dollars in horseflesh, disappearing into the darkness. But there was no time to mourn the loss. The main house was in danger. He sprinted across open ground, bullets kicking up dust at his heels. A rider bore down on him, and Ethan threw himself aside, firing upward. The man tumbled from his saddle, and Ethan caught the reins of the panicked horse, swinging up in one fluid motion. From horseback, he could see the full scope of the attack. The barn was lost, flames reaching 50 feet into the sky. Half his men were pinned down near the bunkhouse. But worst of all, he spotted Bart Hutchins leading 3 men toward the back of the main house, toward the kitchen door. "Sarah!" The warning tore from his throat as he spurred the horse forward. She heard him, turning from the window just as the kitchen door exploded inward. Ethan saw her disappear from view, and his blood turned to ice. He hit the porch at full gallop, diving from the saddle and through the front door. Inside was chaos. Furniture overturned. Margaret screaming. Tommy trying to shield his mother with his small body. Sarah was in the kitchen, using the rifle as a club against 2 attackers. A third lay groaning on the floor. Even as Ethan watched, one man knocked the rifle from her hands and grabbed her by the hair. The rage that filled Ethan then was cold and absolute. He moved without thought, muscle memory from a dozen battles taking over. His first shot took the man holding Sarah. The second spun the other attacker around. He advanced, firing steadily, each shot placed with lethal precision. Bart Hutchins appeared in the doorway. Gun raised, time slowed. Ethan's gun clicked empty. Hutchins smiled, savoring the moment. The shot that rang out came from behind Ethan. Hutchins' smile turned to surprise as red bloomed on his shirt. He looked down, then up, and toppled backward. Sarah stood with a smoking derringer, her hand trembling but her aim true. Nice shot, Ethan managed, reloading with shaking fingers. "Father's gun," she said numbly. "I kept it hidden." Outside, the gunfire was dying down. Jake's voice rose above the crackling flames. "They're pulling back. Let 'em run, boys." Ethan caught Sarah as her knees buckled, the derringer clattering to the floor. "It's over. You're safe." "Tommy, mother." "Here," Tommy appeared in the doorway, supporting Margaret. "We're all right. Sarah, you were amazing." "No," she whispered against Ethan's chest. "I killed a man. I killed him." "You saved my life," Ethan corrected gently. "Nothing more, nothing less." Dawn revealed the full extent of the damage. The barn was a smoking ruin. 30 horses gone, scattered across the desert. 4 ranch hands wounded, though none fatally. And 5 dead attackers, including Bart Hutchins. Sheriff Morrison arrived mid-morning, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Hell of a mess, McGraw. They attacked us. Sheriff. Burned my barn. Tried to burn my house with women and a child inside. So you say, but Kearney's already in my office, claiming you raided his ranch. Says Hutchins was defending himself when Miss Rosewood shot him in cold blood." "That's a lie." Sarah stepped forward, but Ethan caught her arm. "Easy," he murmured, then addressed Morrison. "You know that's not true, Sheriff?" Morrison shifted his weight. "What I know and what I can prove are different things. Kearney's got witnesses saying you started this. You got anybody besides your own people saying different?" The answer hung unspoken. In Kearney's pocket. The law was whatever he said it was. "So, what happens now?" Ethan asked, though he suspected he knew. Now you come peaceful-like to town. Both of you. Let Judge Morse sort this out." "The hell I will. Morse is Kearney's man." Morrison's hand moved to his gun. "Not asking McGraw. You can come peaceful or in irons, but you're coming." Ethan felt Sarah tense beside him, saw his men shifting restlessly. One word from him, and this would turn into another bloodbath. But that would only prove Kearney's lies. "All right, Sheriff. We'll come, but the Rosewoods stay here, under my men's protection." "Can't do it. Kearney's pressing charges against Miss Rosewood specifically. She's named in the complaint." "No." The word came from Margaret, who'd remained silent until now. She stood straight despite her illness, every inch the lady she'd once been. "If my daughter goes, I go. Tommy, too. We're a family, Sheriff Morrison. We face this together." Morrison looked like he'd swallowed something sour. "Ma'am, that's not necessary." "Isn't it?" Margaret's voice could have cut glass. "Or perhaps you'd prefer to explain to the good people of Dust Creek how you dragged a sick woman's daughter away while leaving her to die alone." It was masterful. Morrison might be bought, but he still had to live in the town. Some things even a corrupt lawman couldn't stomach being known for. "Fine," he growled, "but we leave within the hour." As they prepared for the journey, Ethan pulled Jake aside. "Send riders to every ranch in 50 miles. Tell them what happened here. Tell them Kearney's making his move." "Boss, you can't trust Morse to—" "I know, but if I run, I lose everything anyway. This way, maybe we force it into the open." He gripped Jake's shoulder. "If something happens to me, get the Rosewoods out, take them somewhere safe." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Jake said firmly. "Not while I'm breathing." The ride to town was tense. Morrison had brought 10 deputies, all carefully not meeting Ethan's eyes. They knew what they were part of, and shame rode with them like an extra passenger. Sarah rode beside Ethan, her back straight, chin high. She'd changed into her best dress, hair pinned up proper. If she was afraid, it didn't show. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "I don't regret it, any of it." Save the goodbyes, Ethan replied. This isn't over yet. But as they created the rise and saw Dust Creek spread below, his confidence wavered. The streets were lined with armed men, all wearing deputized badges. Kearney had turned the town into an armed camp. They rode down Main Street like a funeral procession. Faces appeared at windows, townsfolk watching with a mixture of curiosity and fear. At the jail, Kearney waited on the boardwalk, dressed in an expensive black suit like an undertaker. Mr. McGraw, he said pleasantly. Miss Rosewood, so good of you to come peacefully. I was afraid there might be unpleasantness. The only unpleasantness is your presence, Sarah said coldly. Kearney's smile widened. Such spirit. Even now, we'll see how long that lasts. Enough talk, Morrison interrupted. Let's get this done. The jail was small, only 3 cells. They put Ethan in one, Sarah in another. The third held a drunk who snored through the entire process. Margaret and Tommy were allowed to remain in the sheriff's office. Margaret's coughing a constant reminder of her condition. Trials set for tomorrow. Morrison announced, Judge Morse wants this handled quick. I'll bet he does, Ethan said dryly. We get a lawyer, if you can find one willing to take your case. They both knew no lawyer in Dust Creek would dare oppose Kearney. The fix was in, neat as could be. As Morrison left, Kearney lingered. You should have taken my offer. McGraw, sold out when you had the chance. Now I get your ranch and the girl. You'll never have her, Ethan said quietly. Not while I draw breath. Well then, Kearney smiled. We'll just have to do something about that breath of yours, won't we? After he left, Sarah reached through the bars separating their cells, finding Ethan's hand. He means to kill you. Probably, but not until after the trial. He needs it to look legal. Then we have tonight to figure something out. Ethan squeezed her fingers. Sarah, if something goes wrong... Nothing will go wrong, she interrupted. Because I'm not losing you. Not when I just found you. Outside, the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky the color of blood. In a few hours, they'd face Kearney's version of justice. But for now, they held on to each other through iron bars, drawing strength from a touch and a promise neither might live to keep. The burned barn was nothing compared to the fire that awaited them tomorrow. But like all fires, this one would either destroy them or forge them into something stronger. Only time would tell which. The courthouse was packed to capacity when Sheriff Morrison let his prisoners in. Word had spread through Dust Creek like wildfire. Ethan McGraw and the Rosewood girl were to stand trial for murder. Some folks came for justice, others for spectacle. But most came because Silas Kearney's men had made it clear that absence would be noticed. Judge Harlan Morse sat behind his bench like a vulture on a fence post, black robes hanging loose on his skeletal frame, his eyes, rheumy with age and whiskey, fixed on the defendants with poorly concealed satisfaction. The territory versus Ethan McGraw and Sarah Rosewood. He intoned, charges of murder, conspiracy, and destruction of property. How do you plead? Not guilty, Ethan said firmly. Not guilty, Sarah echoed, her voice carrying through the courtroom. Kearney sat in the front row, flanked by his remaining men. He'd traded his usual black suit for brown, playing the part of the aggrieved victim. The performance might have been convincing if not for the smirk that kept tugging at his lips. Call your first witness. Morse directed the prosecutor, a nervous man named Whitmore who kept dabbing at his sweating forehead. What followed was a parade of lies. Ranch hands Ethan had never seen before swore they'd witnessed him leading the attack on Kearney's property. Men with shifty eyes and coached stories claimed Sarah had shot Bart Hutchins while he begged for mercy. Each testimony was more outrageous than the last. Your Honor, Ethan interrupted during particularly egregious perjury. This man wasn't even there. Half these witnesses... You'll have your chance to speak Mr. McGraw. Morse cut him off. Another outburst and I'll have you gagged. Sarah's hand found his under the table, squeezing hard. Stay calm, the touch said. Don't give them what they want. When the prosecution rested, Morse turned to the defendants. You may speak in your defense, though I warn you, the evidence seems quite damning. Ethan stood slowly, aware of every hostile eye in the room. Your Honor, this trial is a farce and everyone here knows it. Kearney attacked my ranch, burned my barn, tried to burn my house with women and a child inside. Can you prove any of these allegations? Morse interrupted. I have witnesses, my men. Your employees. You mean hardly unbiased testimony, as opposed to Kearney's hired liars. The crack of Morse's gavel echoed like a gunshot. You're treading on dangerous ground. McGraw. I'm already on dangerous ground. Judge, have been since I refused to sell my ranch to Kearney. Ethan turned to address the packed courtroom. How many of you have been squeezed by this man? How many have lost property to mysterious debts, been forced out by hired guns? A murmur ran through the crowd. Morrison stepped forward, hand on his gun. But Ethan continued, Tom Bradley, didn't Kearney take your store when you couldn't pay protection, Mary Watson? Your husband died real convenient-like when he wouldn't sell his mining claim. And you, Judge Morse, how much is he paying you to pervert justice? Silence. Morse was on his feet, face purple. Sheriff, restrain the defendant. But before Morrison could move, Sarah stood. I shot Bart Hutchins. The courtroom went quiet. I shot him, she continued, her voice clear and steady. Because he was about to kill Mr. McGraw. Because he and his men broke into a home where my sick mother and young brother were sleeping. Because they came in the night like cowards to burn and murder. She turned to face the crowd, and Ethan saw tears running down her cheeks, but her voice never wavered. I'm not sorry. I'd do it again to protect the people I love. If that makes me a murderer in the eyes of this court, so be it. But I think everyone here knows who the real murderers are. Enough! Morse slammed his gavel repeatedly. I've heard enough. The defendants are clearly Judge Morse. The voice came from the back of the courtroom. A young man in a travel-dusted suit pushed through the crowd, carrying a leather portfolio. Who are you? Morse demanded. This is a closed proceeding. James Harper, attorney at law, sent by the territorial governor to observe these proceedings. He produced official papers. There have been concerns about the administration of justice in Dust Creek. Kearney was on his feet. This is irregular. The trial has already begun. Indeed, it has, Harper agreed. And what I've observed is quite troubling. Perhaps we should discuss the documents that arrived in Tucson last week, the ones detailing systematic corruption, forged debts, and murder for hire. He pulled papers from his portfolio, sworn affidavits from citizens of Dust Creek, financial records showing bribes paid to certain officials. Most interesting is this testimony from a Mr. Carl Deacon, former employee of Mr. Kearney, who provides quite detailed accounts of criminal activities. Deacon's dead, Kearney snarled. Killed in a riding accident last month. Actually, he's under protective custody in Tucson, Harper smiled. Very much alive and eager to testify. The courtroom erupted. Some of Kearney's men headed for the doors, only to find them blocked by federal marshals who'd slipped in during the commotion. Order! Morse screamed, but his authority was crumbling. This court is hereby suspended pending federal investigation, Harper announced. Judge Morse, you're under arrest for corruption. Sheriff Morrison, you'll surrender your badge to Marshal Coleman. You can't do this, Kearney's careful control finally snapped. I own this town. I made it what it is. What you made, Mr. Kearney, was a haven for criminals and a mockery of justice. Harper turned to the packed courtroom. Any citizen who wishes to provide testimony about criminal activities may do so without fear of reprisal. Federal protection will be provided. What happened next surprised everyone. Most of all, Ethan. Tom Bradley stood up. "I'll testify," the shopkeeper said quietly. "About the protection money, the forged debt. All of it." "So will I," Mary Watson added, her voice stronger. "About my husband's murder." One by one, others stood. Years of fear and oppression crumbled in minutes as the people of Dust Creek found their voices. Kearney watched his empire collapse, face growing more twisted with each testimony. "You," he pointed at Sarah, spittle flying. "This is all your fault, you and your pride, refusing what I offered. I could have made you a queen. I'd rather be an honest woman than queen of a kingdom built on fear." Sarah replied. Kearney lunged for her, but Ethan was already moving. His fist connected with Kearney's jaw with years of suppressed rage behind it. The land baron went down hard, blood streaming from his nose. "That's assault," Kearney screamed from the floor. "You all saw it." "I saw a man defending his fiancée from attack," Harper said mildly. "Marshal Coleman, please take Mr. Kearney into custody. The federal prosecutor will have numerous questions." As the marshals hauled Kearney away, still screaming threats, Harper approached Ethan and Sarah. "Miss Rosewood, your letter was very compelling. It took time to verify your claims and mobilize federal resources, but your courage in writing made this possible." "My letter?" Sarah looked confused. Margaret Rosewood appeared at Harper's side, looking frailer than ever but with triumph in her eyes. "The letter I sent in your name. Dear, forgive an old woman's presumption, but I couldn't stand by while that man destroyed everything good in this town." "Mother," Sarah embraced her carefully. "You could have been killed if Kearney found out." "Perhaps. But what kind of example would I set for my children if I let fear rule me?" Margaret smiled at Ethan. "Besides, I had faith that good men still existed. I wasn't wrong." The courtroom was clearing, folks heading out to spread the news. The reign of Silas Kearney was over. There would be a reckoning, trials, revelations, justice long delayed. But for now, in this moment, the good people of Dust Creek could breathe free. "It's over," Sarah said wonderingly. "It's really over." "The legal parts, maybe," Ethan agreed. "Still have a ranch to rebuild, horses to recover, a life to piece back together." "We have that," she corrected, linking her arm through his. "We have all of that to do, together." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds that had gathered during the trial. Light flooded Main Street, revealing the shabby buildings and dusty thoroughfare. But to the people emerging from the courthouse, Dust Creek had never looked finer. Tommy ran to his sister, notebook clutched in his hands. "I wrote it all down. Every word. This is better than any of my history books." "That's because you're living it," Ethan told him, ruffling the boy's hair. "Real history happens when ordinary people stand up to extraordinary evil." "Is that what we did?" Tommy asked. Sarah looked at her family, her recovering mother, her brave young brother, and the man who'd risked everything for strangers who became family. Then she looked at the townspeople, talking excitedly, some crying with relief, all standing a little straighter. "Yes," she said softly, "that's exactly what we did." As they walked toward the boarding house, Ethan pulled Sarah aside. "You know, Harper called you my fiancé in there." "I noticed that." "Well, seeing as how it's now part of the official court record." He dropped to one knee right there on Main Street, producing a simple gold band from his pocket. "Sarah Rosewood, will you marry me, not for debts or protection or convenience, but because I can't imagine any other answer to the question of my life?" Sarah laughed through her tears, remembering her challenge from that night on the ranch. "Yes, Ethan McGraw. Yes to all of it. To the ranch and the work and the life we'll build, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger as the townspeople cheered. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, promising rain for the drought-stricken land. Change was coming to Dust Creek in more ways than one. But for now, in the light of a new day. A gunfighter turned rancher kissed his bride-to-be while her family and half the town looked on. It wasn't the ending to their story. Too much lay ahead for that, but it was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. And that, as any resident of Dust Creek would tell you, was worth celebrating. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. The first truly beautiful day after weeks of rebuilding. The Triple M Ranch had risen from its ashes. A new barn stood where the old had burned, and a fresh paint gleamed on the ranch house. It was a symbol of renewal that seemed fitting for the occasion. Sarah stood before the mirror in what had been Ethan's mother's room, smoothing the cream-colored silk dress Margaret had altered for her. It wasn't fancy by city standards, but it was the finest thing she'd ever worn. "You look beautiful," Margaret said from her chair by the window. The past weeks had been kind to her, with proper food and medicine. Her cough had lessened, though everyone knew the reprieve was temporary. "I'm nervous," Sarah admitted. "Is that silly after everything we've been through, to be nervous about a wedding?" "Not at all. Dear, a wedding is a beginning, and beginnings should make us nervous. It means we understand their importance." A knock at the door interrupted them. "Sarah," Tommy's voice called. "Mister, Jake says to tell you the guests are here. Lots of them." Sarah moved to the window and gasped. Wagons and riders filled the yard. Seemingly half of Dust Creek had come to witness the wedding of the woman who'd helped bring down Silas Kearney and the rancher who'd stood against tyranny. "Oh my," she breathed. "The whole territory wants to celebrate," Margaret observed with satisfaction. "You two have become something of a legend. We just wanted to be left alone to live our lives." "And that's exactly why people admire you. You fought not for glory, but for the simple right to choose your own path." Another knock, more insistent. "Sarah Elizabeth Rosewood," Cookie's voice boomed through the door. "You got exactly 5 minutes before I come in there and carry you out myself. That man of yours is wearing a groove in the ground with his pacing." Sarah laughed, the nervousness easing. "Tell him I'm coming." She took her mother's arm, and together they made their way downstairs. Tommy waited at the bottom in his new suit, looking older than his 12 years. "You sure about this?" "Sarah," he asked seriously. "Because I've been reading about contracts, and marriage is a pretty permanent one." "I'm sure," she said, kissing his forehead. "But thank you for looking out for me." "That's what brothers do," he said proudly. "Even if Ethan's going to be my brother too now, that's not too strange. Is it, having your sister's husband as a brother?" "We're making our own kind of family," Sarah told him. "Strange is relative out here." The wedding was to be held in the meadow behind the house, where wildflowers had bloomed in profusion after the recent rains. As Sarah stepped onto the back porch, she saw that someone, probably Jake in the hands, had built an archway of twisted juniper branches and desert roses. But it was the man waiting beneath that archway who took her breath away. Ethan McGraw had traded his usual ranch wear for a black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean height. His hair was neatly trimmed, his jaw freshly shaved, but it was the look in his eyes that made her heart race. Wonder, love, and just a hint of that dangerous edge that had first drawn her to him. Reverend Morrison, no relation to the former sheriff, had ridden in from Prescott to perform the ceremony. He was a young man, earnest and kind, who jumped at the chance to marry the couple whose story had spread across the territory. The walk across the meadow seemed both endless and too short. Sarah was aware of the watching crowd, ranchers and townspeople, cowboys and merchants, all united in witnessing this moment. She saw Jake grinning broadly, Cookie dabbing at his eyes with his apron, and even some of Kearney's former men who'd stayed to work honest jobs. Then Ethan took her hand, and the world narrowed to just the two of them. "You came," he said softly. "Did you doubt?" "Never, but I'm still grateful." He raised her hand to his lips, a courtly gesture that made some of the ladies sigh. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "Sweet talk won't get you out of this now, cowboy," she teased, though her voice trembled. Good. I don't want out. I want in, all the way in. For all the days we have. Reverend Morrison cleared his throat. Dearly beloved, we gather here under God's wide sky to witness the joining of two souls who have already proven their bond through trials that would break lesser spirits. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When it came time for the vows, Ethan surprised everyone by speaking first, without prompting. Sarah, you asked me once not to keep score, not to make this about debts and payments, but I find I can't help it, because I owe you everything. You gave me back my humanity when I thought it was lost forever. You showed me that the past doesn't have to define the future. You made me believe I could be more than a hired gun with a guilty conscience. He pulled out a leather cord, the same type used for binding horse tackle, worn smooth with age. I don't have fancy words or city manners, but I have this, a cowboy's promise. I wrap this around our joined hands as a sign that I choose you, Sarah. Not just today, but every day, in drought and plenty, in danger and peace, in all the seasons of our lives. I choose you forever. He wound the cord around their clasped hands, the simple gesture somehow more meaningful than any elaborate ritual. Sarah had to swallow hard before she could speak. Ethan McGraw, you impossible, stubborn, wonderful man. You gave me strength when I needed it most. You showed my family kindness when the world showed us its teeth. You stood against evil not because it was easy or profitable, but because it was right. She placed her free hand over their bound ones. I don't need you to be perfect. I don't need you to forget your past or pretend the shadows don't sometimes still reach for you. I just need you to let me stand beside you when they do. I choose you, Ethan, today, tomorrow, and all the days God grants us. Forever. The rings, Reverend Morrison prompted. Tommy stepped forward importantly, producing two simple gold bands. I kept them safe, he announced to the crowd, earning chuckles. As Ethan slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger, he spoke the traditional words with a depth of feeling that had more than one hardened rancher reaching for a bandana. With this ring, I thee wed. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she returned the gesture. With this ring, I thee wed. By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona and the Lord above. Reverend Morrison declared, I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. You may kiss your bride, Mr. McGraw. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He pulled Sarah into his arms and kissed her with a thoroughness that had the crowd whooping and Margaret murmuring something about propriety. When they finally parted, both were breathless and grinning. Ladies and gentlemen, the Reverend announced, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Ethan McGraw. The celebration that followed was one for the history books. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Everyone had brought something, turning it into the largest potluck Dust Creek had ever seen. Musicians appeared with fiddles and guitars, and soon the meadow rang with music and laughter. I can't believe all these people came, Sarah said as she and Ethan took a brief respite from the dancing. They came for you, Ethan corrected. You gave them hope when Kearney had beaten it out of them. That's not something folks forget. We gave them hope, together. Together, he agreed, pulling her close. I like the sound of that. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Jake called for attention. Friends, neighbors, and assorted troublemakers, he began, earning laughs. I've worked for Ethan McGraw for 5 years now. In that time, I've seen him face down rustlers, survive droughts, and build this ranch from nothing. But I've never seen him as happy as he's been since a certain young lady threw whiskey in Silas Kearney's face. The crowd cheered at the memory. So here's to the bride and groom. Jake raised his glass. May your love be as strong as desert wind, as enduring as these mountains, and as wild as the land we call home. To Ethan and Sarah. To Ethan and Sarah, the crowd echoed. As the party continued around them, Ethan led Sarah away from the crowd. toward the small rise that overlooked the ranch. From there, they could see everything: the new barn, the house where her family now lived, the corrals filled with horses, the land stretching endlessly under the star-filled sky. "No regrets?" he asked softly. Sarah considered the question seriously. About marrying a rancher with a dangerous past, more enemies than friends, and a tendency to attract trouble like honey attracts bears. "When you put it like that..." She turned in his arms, framing his face with her hands. "No regrets, Ethan, not one. This is where I belong. With you, on this land, building something worth having. Even if it's hard, even if there are more Kearneys out there." "Especially then. We've already proven we're stronger together than apart." He kissed her then, slow and deep, a promise without words. In the distance, the music played on, their guests celebrating into the night. But here, in their private moment, the world consisted of just two souls who'd found home in each other. "I love you, Sarah McGraw," Ethan said against her lips. "And I love you, Ethan McGraw, forever." "Forever," he agreed, then smiled with a hint of his old mischief. "Though I should warn you, Cookie's expecting you to help with breakfast tomorrow. Being a ranch wife starts early." Sarah laughed, the sound bright as stars. "Then we'd better get some rest. After all, we have a lifetime of early mornings ahead of us." Hand in hand, they walked back toward their future, leaving the past in the shadows where it belonged. The wedding was ending, but their marriage, their choice of each other, renewed daily, was just beginning. And in the annals of Dust Creek history, it would be remembered not just as a wedding, but as the day two wounded souls proved that love could bloom even in the harshest ground, as long as you were brave enough to tend it. 5 years had passed since the wedding that brought together a gunfighter seeking redemption and a woman who refused to bend. The Triple M Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous spreads in the Arizona Territory. Its success measured not just in cattle and acreage, but in the lives it sustained. Sarah stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of copper and gold. Her hand rested protectively on her rounded belly. Their third child would arrive before winter. Inside, she could hear 4-year-old Benjamin teaching 2-year-old Margaret how to play checkers, his patient voice so like his father's. "Mama, Maggie's cheating again," Ben called out. "Am not," came the indignant reply. Sarah smiled, about to intervene when she spotted riders approaching. Ethan led them, sitting easy in the saddle despite the long day. Behind him rode Tommy, now 17 and tall as a reed, along with Jake and the other hands. "Successful drive?" she asked as Ethan dismounted. "Best yet. The railroad's hungry for beef, and we've got plenty to spare." He kissed her hello, his hand joining hers on her belly. "How's our little bronc rider?" "Kicking up a storm. Takes after his father." "Or her mother." Ethan countered with a grin. "Lord knows you're the stubborn one in this family." Tommy swung down from his horse, dusty but grinning. "Sarah, you should have seen the buyers' faces when Ethan negotiated. I swear that man from Chicago turned 3 different shades of red." "Language, Thomas," Sarah chided gently. "Sorry, sis, I mean, Mr. Pemberton looked quite flustered during the negotiations." Ethan ruffled the boy's hair, though he had to reach up now to do it. "You did good out there, Tom. That ledger work was perfect. You'll make a fine ranch manager someday." "Or a lawyer," Tommy said, then quickly added at Ethan's mock horrified expression. "Honest one, like Mr. Harper." They gathered for dinner in the large dining room, the table full with family and the hands who'd become like family. Cookie had outdone himself with a roast that melted on the tongue, and Margaret, though confined to her wheeled chair now, presided over the meal with quiet dignity. "Grace, Benjamin," she reminded her grandson gently. The boy folded his small hands, so like Ethan's, and recited, "Thank you, Lord, for this food, For Mama and Papa, for Grandmama and Uncle Tommy and Cookie and Mr. Jake and everybody. And please help Maggie stop putting checker pieces in her mouth. Amen." "Amen," the table chorused, hiding smiles. After dinner, as was their custom, the family gathered in the parlor. Tommy worked on his correspondence course from the college in Tucson. Margaret dozed in her chair while little Maggie played with blocks at her feet. Ben curled against Sarah's side as she read from a book of tales. Ethan sat at his desk, going over accounts, but Sarah caught him watching them more than his ledgers. She raised an eyebrow in question. "Just thinking," he said softly. "Dangerous habit," she teased. "Maybe, but good thoughts this time." He set aside his pen. "Jake told me something interesting today. They're talking about making Arizona a state, real statehood, with representatives and senators." "About time," Tommy said, looking up from his books. "We've been a territory for too long. They'll need good men in government." Ethan continued. "Men who understand both the old ways and the new. Men who've proven they'll stand up for what's right." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Ethan McGraw, are you thinking of going into politics?" "Not me," he said quickly. "But maybe someone younger. Someone with education and integrity. Someone who's seen what happens when power goes unchecked." All eyes turned to Tommy, who flushed. I'm only 17. "Now you are. But statehood's probably 5-10 years away. You'll be ready by then, if it's what you want." "Tommy is a politician," Ben piped up. "Would he have to wear a funny hat?" "Only on special occasions," Sarah assured him solemnly. Later that evening, after the children were abed and Margaret retired, Sarah and Ethan walked out to their favorite spot, the rise overlooking the ranch. The moon was full, turning the desert into a landscape of silver and shadow. "Do you miss it?" Sarah asked suddenly. "The excitement, the danger. Life was simpler when you just had to worry about yourself." Ethan considered the question, his arm around her shoulders. "I thought I might. In those first months after the wedding, I'd wake up expecting it all to be a dream, too good to last. And now I know the truth. That life wasn't simpler. It was emptier. Every sunset looked the same because I had no one to share it with. Every sunrise just meant another day to get through." He turned her to face him. "You didn't just save my life, Sarah. You gave me a reason to live it." "We saved each other," she corrected. "I was drowning too, in my own way. Too proud to admit I needed help. Too stubborn to accept it when offered. Good thing I'm more stubborn than you." "Debatable," she laughed. They stood in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across the moon. In the distance, a coyote called, answered by another. The ranch slept peacefully below them, cattle in the pastures, horses in the corrals, their children safe in their beds. "Ethan?" "I've been thinking about Mother. The doctor says, "I know." His arms tightened around her. "She's had 5 good years she wouldn't have had otherwise. She's seen Tommy grow into a man, held her grandchildren. That's more than many get." "I want her to meet this one," Sarah said, touching her belly. "She will. Your mother's tough as rawhide beneath that gentle exterior. Where do you think you got it from?" A shooting star streaked across the sky, and Sarah closed her eyes to make a wish. When she opened them, Ethan was smiling at her. "What did you wish for?" "Can't tell you, or it won't come true." "Fair enough, but I'll tell you mine. It already came true, so I figure it's safe." "Oh, I wished for this, for you, for our children, for a life worth living, for the chance to prove that a man can change, can be more than his worst moments." Sarah reached up to touch the silver threading through his hair at the temples. "You've more than proven that." "Have I? Sometimes I still see him in the mirror. That cold-eyed gunfighter who didn't care about anything but the next job, the next dollar." "I see him too," Sarah admitted. But I also see the man who read to Tommy when he had nightmares, who held my mother's hand through her pain, who teaches our son to be gentle with animals smaller than himself, who shows our daughter that she's valued for her spirit, not just her pretty face. When you put it like that, I sound almost respectable. Almost, she agreed with a grin. Though you did threaten to shoot that traveling salesman last week. He was selling snake oil to desperate people. Someone had to run him off. Mm-hmm. And the way you accidentally let the air out of his wagon tires. Pure coincidence. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the still night air. As they turned back toward the house, Sarah paused for one last look at the land spread before them. No regrets, Ethan asked, echoing his question from their wedding night. Not one, she said firmly. Oh, there've been hard times, drought and sickness, storms and struggles, but through it all, we've had each other. We've built something real here, Ethan, something that will last beyond us. A legacy, he agreed. Not of fire like Kearney tried to build, but of hope, of proof that people can stand together against darkness and win. Is that why you want Tommy in politics, to spread that hope wider? Partly, but mostly because he's got your courage and your mama's wisdom. The territory, the state, will need leaders like that. They walked slowly back to the house, in no hurry to end the evening. On the porch, Ethan paused, looking back at the land one more time. You know what I realized today? What's that? It's been 6 months since I even thought about checking my gun before walking out the door. 6 months since I looked over my shoulder expecting trouble. He shook his head in wonder. Never thought I'd see the day when Ethan McGraw could let his guard down. You haven't let it down, Sarah said softly. You've just learned to share the watch. That's what family does. We guard each other. Inside, all was peaceful. They checked on the children. Ben sprawled across his bed like he was claiming territory. Maggie curled into a tight ball with her thumb in her mouth. In her room, Margaret slept propped on pillows to ease her breathing, her face peaceful in the moonlight. As they prepared for bed themselves, Sarah caught Ethan watching her with that look again, the one that still made her heart skip after 5 years. What? Just remembering, that first night you walked into the Silver Dollar. Proud as a queen despite everything. I thought I was doing you a favor, stepping in. And now I know the truth. You were the one doing me a favor. You could have married any man in the territory once Kearney was gone. Could have gone anywhere, done anything. But I chose you, Sarah finished. I chose this life, this land, this family, and I'd choose it again tomorrow and every day after. He crossed to her, framing her face with hands gentled by love and fatherhood. How did I get so lucky? Clean living, she suggested with a straight face. He laughed, pulling her close. Must be it. As they settled into bed, Sarah nestled against her husband's side, feeling the baby move within her. Outside, the wind sang through the canyons, carrying the scent of sage and coming rain. The Triple M Ranch slumbered under the vast Arizona sky, its buildings and fences a testament to hard work and determination. But more than that, it stood as proof of a greater truth, that love could bloom in the harshest ground, that two damaged souls could heal each other, that choosing to stand together was the bravest act of all. I love you, Ethan McGraw, Sarah whispered into the darkness. And I love you, Sarah McGraw, came the rumbling response. Forever. Forever, she agreed, already drifting toward sleep. In the morning, there would be chores and children, responsibilities and challenges. The ranch would demand their attention. The future would call with its promises and uncertainties. But for now, in this perfect moment, they had everything they needed, each other, their family, and the life they'd built from courage, determination, and love. The ghosts of the past had finally been laid to rest, replaced by the bright promise of tomorrow. And in the history of the Arizona Territory, their story would be remembered not as a tale of violence overcome, but as proof that love, stubborn, defiant, enduring love, could conquer all. In a land that knew only extremes, scorching heat and bitter cold, devastating drought and flash floods, they had found balance in each other. The gunfighter and the saloon girl, the broken soldier and the proud woman, had become something greater together than they ever could have been apart. They had chosen each other, chosen their love, chosen their future. And that choice, renewed each day like the sunrise over the desert, was truly forever. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Ethan and Sarah's journey from that first confrontation in the saloon to their beautiful life together on the Triple M Ranch. If you're listening to this story, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts about their adventure. If you enjoyed this tale of romance and redemption in the Old West, please subscribe to my channel Wild West Night for more stories that capture the spirit of frontier life. Don't forget to hit that like button and press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners who love Western romance. Your support means the world and helps me continue bringing these tales of the American frontier to life. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunset.